As we get started on this topic, I want to also just acknowledge I'm speaking from my home tonight in New Westminster. For thousands of years, this has been the traditional and ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Musqueam, and Quiquite First Nations. Today, this place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, as well as settlers such as myself. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today and to meet with you all. So what are our goals together today? In a short period of just under an hour, my main hope is that we are able to answer together some options for supporting recovery if you have a loved one who is using substances. Now, if you are coming here today, I suspect you have so many experiences already of people telling you to do this. You must do that. If you have to do this. And if you don't do this, then terrible things will happen. So I just want to acknowledge this as well. Not only are you likely coming and feeling very stressed out and very worried for your loved one, you are also likely coming in with a lot of information and a lot of suggestions that you've already received and a lot of advice already, much of which might conflict with other advice and information that you got already as well. So I just really want to acknowledge that and really respect that as well. The talk today is not going to give you advice. Instead, what this talk is going to do is going to review the science of why behavior change is hard, so we can understand what our loved ones are going through. If we are going to tackle any problem, we first need to understand it in order to understand what is helpful. Then we're going to go over some science-based options that you may not have heard about. And unfortunately, it's not exhaustive. There are more tools than we can cover all and in detail today. So this is just a selection for your consideration. And I will be clear, this talk is not going to load on more shoulds, musts, and have-tos. I won't be able to give you for certain answers that will definitely fix your unique family situation. Because really, if it was that simple, you probably would already have that answer already. You would have found it. What we will be doing is pointing out tools, options, approaches that may help you figure out for yourself what is going to help you and your unique family situation. And when I say family here, I'm not just referring to biologically based relationships. I'm talking about any close relationships that includes found family, friendships, partnerships, as well as parents. And I also want to acknowledge that my experience is primarily working with adults and family members of adults with substance use disorders. It's not to say that these options or approaches won't work with adolescents or children, but I just want to be clear and upfront about my experience and skill set too. And lastly, we're going to end the talk today with free and low-cost resources to find out more about some of the different things that I'm covering today. So, before we talk about your loved one and substance use specifically, let's first talk about human beings in general, including ourselves. Why don't we make changes? Any change? Why don't we do the healthy option? Often, it's because healthy behavior or health promoting behavior is actually abnormal behavior. And I'll get to what I mean in just a moment. In understanding any behavior, it's important to know that all behaviors are influenced by our environment, social factors, and individual factors. We often focus in on the individual factors, like, is someone motivated to do something? And we will get to that. But I want to mention environmental and social too, because we can often minimize those and the impact that they can have on our behavior. Like, for example, we say things like, oh, I don't exercise because I'm just lazy, right? And behavior, it always has influences. It always has reasons. So we want to look at them. Environmental factors include things like availability of different options, cost, convenience. For example, I might want to change my diet, eat less fried food, but the cost and convenience of other meal options influences whether I'm going to do that. How much time does it take to make food from scratch? What about my energy level after work? If I want to go to the gym more, how close is a gym to me? And what's the cost of going there and time and money? It's all going to influence whether I do that or not. Social factors are things like, what do people I know do? Do people I know take medications or go to therapy? That's going to influence whether I take medications and go to therapy. How do people I know celebrate or handle stress? If that's by drinking or using substances, well, that's likely going to influence my own substance use behavior as well. So to get to individual factors, often here, this includes things like reward. And reward is important here, especially when we talk about healthy behavior potentially being abnormal. So often health damaging behaviors have early payoffs. Like if I smoke, I might feel relaxed or energized almost immediately. Yet the risk of my possibly developing lung cancer or heart disease may even be several decades away. Similarly, health protective behaviors like exercise, they often have costs up front. Like you have to get out of bed early to go to the gym or to go on that exercise bike. And it initially does not feel great, right? But then the payoffs of improved fitness, feeling better, those don't happen until a few weeks later. So it's completely rational in some circumstances to choose an immediate, definite reward over a long-term possible reward. Why engage in costs now when there's only a risk of a possible positive outcome later? So what can we conclude, and how does this apply to the people we care about? Really, it's about behaviors make sense. If we look at this brief list of reasons for doing any behavior, anybody see anything on that list that they want, that they like? Most of us would, right? And feel free, if you feel comfortable, write in the chat anything that you relate to, or even anything that you think might be missing from this list. Thinking about rewards and timing of rewards is helpful when we also think about our loved one, because we want to think, what might they be getting out of their use? Because again, understanding a problem is key for generating ideas of what to do next. And also, knowing that what might be interesting rewards for me likely aren't the same for you. And everybody's a little bit different in this. And that's going to tell us that probably the strategies that might work for one person are probably going to be a little bit different for each individual. In addition to rewards, other individual factors that can influence our likelihood to make any change include our attitudes, beliefs, and biases about health. Like, so what do I view as healthy is relevant for whether I may or may not make a change. Also, I may think a change is important and beneficial to me, but I might have other things that are greater priority. Like I want to start exercising more, but I don't have the support for childcare or getting chores done in the house, making sure everyone's fed. That's more important. Self-efficacy has a huge role. If I tried to do this thing, would I be able to achieve it? Have I tried making this change in the past? Was I successful? How do I define success? I may want to make a change. I may think it's important and beneficial, but if I don't see myself as actually being able to do it, I certainly am not going to try. So feel free, again, if you feel comfortable, feel free to write in the chat any responses you have that you're willing to share to the group in general. Doesn't have to be what the change is, but just as you think about changes you've tried to make in your life, whether that's diet, exercise, something else, just think, how long have you been thinking about this change in your life? Have you taken steps towards this change? How consistent are you in achieving those steps? And does this change come and go from your mind? Or is it constant? What influences it? So I see a couple people talking about different changes they've wanted to make in their life. But I'm wondering, as you think about these challenges, does it come and go? The motivation to make this change, the actual making of changes? One thing I often hear from people is time of year might influence it. It's February right now. January is often a time where people do New Year's resolutions, and that influences their likelihood to make a change. So I'm seeing one person, it's been 10 years that they've really been working on a change. Someone else, 6 months, it's consistent, although other things like fatigue kind of influence how much I might be devoting and how much I stick to my plan or my goal for this. That's pretty typical. Most of us, in any kind of change we make in our lives, it's on and off. Multiple attempts, times of the year might influence it. Health and stress influence it. Sometimes I'm too stressed to possibly make a change, or sometimes I'm so stressed, something has to change. We can have different reactions sometimes. People tend to think that change happens like you're doing something, you kind of plateau, so then you do something new and keep progressing. Or when we think about substance use in particular, you're doing something, it works for you in some way, like taking away anxiety, but now it kind of no longer works for you. Maybe it causes you harm. So then you're motivated to make a change. You make the decision, like going to treatment, and then it's done. What we know from research is that change is actually a bunch of successive approximations. It's continuous experimentation. Sometimes the previous behavior still gets you what you want. Sometimes it comes at a cost. Sometimes the new behavior gets you what you want. Sometimes it comes with cost too, like time and effort. You don't feel like it sometimes. But over time, the continued experiments with the new behavior typically get you closer to wherever it is that you want to go. So, how does this matter for the challenges we talked about earlier? If someone isn't doing something, maybe it's not a priority for them. Maybe they're not sure the old way needs to change. There could be some really big rewards in it. Or maybe it's a priority, but they have low self-efficacy in feeling they can make the change. Maybe they're between one of these abandoned experiments. So we need to be able to expect ambivalence with any loved one making a change. We expect them to not be sure about a change, not sure if they can do it, or that they might have shifting priorities. And actually, ambivalence is pretty great. If you sense ambivalence or uncertainty with your loved one, this is all a step in the direction of change. We just don't want people to get stuck there, constantly waffling back and forth. Do I make a change or not? We want to help them get closer to the life that they want to live, to meet their goals. So again, big question is, well, how do we do this? Well, let's start with what most of us naturally do, even with the best of intentions. Most of us give advice, right? We advocate for change because we so desperately want to help. And this tendency is actually so common. They have a term for it. It's called the righting reflex. And especially in healthcare, someone comes to see us for a problem. We've got some expertise in that problem. So we share it with people and we tell them what to do. Has anyone ever had an appointment with a healthcare professional where they start telling you, why you need to exercise more, why you have to quit smoking, change your diet, take medications that have some pretty big side effects. And what tends to happen? For many of us, we have the experience where we kind of go, yeah, but we start arguing for the other side, why we can't make the change, or maybe not like that, or we start sharing all the different things that get in the way. So many of us, we have the experience where we know that that persuasion or advice, even with the best intentions that was given to us, it doesn't work super well. And as family members, as often we've tried to convince a loved one to do something, and we definitely have experienced that other side. Has anyone ever told their loved one how important something is, how you've got ideas for how they could do it, and then you get loads of yeah, buts, or maybe they just shut down completely and walk away? We can get so frustrated when we feel like they can't see what we think is just so important or would be so helpful. And yet we're also not sure what else to do because of limits on time, or we're so worried for them. Or in our role as a parent or support person, we feel we just have to share this information or advice because the consequences of doing something different potentially could be so terrible. We're terrified of what might happen if I don't try to convince them. So in deciding our options of what to do, let's summarize what we know from the science of behavior change. When you are ambivalent about a change, you feel strongly about both sides. Whichever side someone else takes, you'll take the other one because both sides matter. So if we, as a helper or support person, start giving information and advice, the person we are talking to naturally will take the other side. The problem is, the more anyone argues or talks about one side, the more likely their behavior and actions are to be on that side. So by trying to convince or give advice, even with the best of intentions, we can actually make it less likely that someone will make the behavior change that we think would be so helpful. The other key part of this is it all hinges on autonomy. All of us want choice and control in what we do. So when we feel that this is being taken away from us, we push back against it, even if we might agree with what that person says. So to put another way, if you tell me I must do something, I'm going to automatically push back away from that, even if it is something that I kind of wanted to do. All right. So now you all have a bit of a crash course on behavior change and how motivation works. So what are some options as family members and support people? Tool number one is just to recognize the challenge of behavior change. What might be the factors that are relevant for the person in front of you that you love and care about? As in, yes, they may see the benefits of change, but what are the benefits of not changing? Why do they use? What needs is their use meeting? What would they do instead of using? Is there anything there that I, as a support person, could help encourage and support? And also, what about their self-efficacy? They might see the benefit of making a change, but not feel like they are going to be able to do it. The other piece is knowing that ambivalence is part of the change, and that the reasons and influences of why someone uses substances are going to be very unique to an individual. So what is going to be helpful for them is definitely going to be individualized as well. Tool option number 2. Simply listening can give the other person room to say what they are thinking and feeling, which can give you more info to work with them as you try to help them. It can also help your loved one feel safer and potentially more open to change as a result, because they don't feel so defensive and under attack. Listening and reflecting back what you're hearing from someone can also help reduce stigma and shame. Two things we know from research that tend to reduce the likelihood someone will reach out for help. Simply listening can also help increase the connection, collaboration, and hope in your relationship. To have some connection and a solid relationship with them can help keep conversations going to explore options. Now, this sounds simple, but you all likely know that this is actually very hard. It's very hard not to interrupt, to not talk over, or not to comment. So now, tool option number 3. This is a possible communication tool that might be helpful in those moments. And it's called the ask, offer, ask method. It's also known as the information sandwich. So this is really when you have information or suggestions you really want to share with your loved one, and yet you want to do it in a way that combats that seesaw persuasion problem we saw before, and just make it more likely that they might be receptive to the information or suggestions that you have for them. Now, first, before you consider using this tool, it's important to make sure that your loved one really knows that you understand a situation. Or to put it another way, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So that means before you offer any suggestions or info, you want to really spend time to mirror back that understanding. You're really looking for that yes reaction from your loved one, that you're getting that yes kind of thing. If you get yeah, but someone's really telling you no because. So ideally you want that yes, exactly before you start offering info. And you also want to make sure that you have enough time, right? If it is 5 minutes before an appointment or you're in a rush, now's not the best time to offer information. Those are kind of some red lights in communication, where we're looking for some green lights. Okay, it might be time that I could offer a suggestion or offer information or offer advice, but I'm going to do it in this format that makes it more likely that it'll be well received. So step 1 of the information sandwich, or ask, offer, ask. The first ask is asking permission to offer our suggestions or thoughts. It's like the conversational equivalent of knocking on a door before entering. You're looking for a green light here before proceeding. If someone says no, we back off. We don't go for it. We want to preserve our relationship, so that door might be opened in the future. We want to stay collaborative and talk with, not at someone. Step 2, if they say yes, then we offer information, make some suggestions, or give some feedback. Typically, it's best if we offer a few different options, and again, staying true to that spirit of collaboration, emphasizing choice, allowing for them to disagree with us. And then step 3, and this one's very easy to forget, but it's really important, is we want to check in with how did that information land with someone? How was that information received? Because then you can correct misunderstandings and keep the collaboration going. Now, I'm going to move on to the 4th tool for this evening. Typically on this tool, people have questions. So feel free, write them in the chat now. In just a few moments, we're going to get to the question and answer period, and so we can talk about that. So if you want, I need more examples or anything like that, feel free, put your questions in the chat now, and we'll get to those in just a few moments. So let's go through the 4th tool, because I know we're moving quickly through here, but I want to make sure that we have opportunity for questions. So one last tool option that I want to cover today is self-compassion. Has anyone here today noticed themselves saying some of these statements, or even just connect with these statements like, I don't even want to see friends anymore, or I can't imagine what people think. Or sometimes, if only I had done this, or only I had done that, or maybe I'll take care of myself once my kid or once my loved one is in treatment. Often in situations like this, it can feel like we are desperately driving in an emergency, and like you can't stop the car because you just so desperately need to get where you're going. And once I'm there, that's when I'll fill up the gas tank. That's when I'll top up the other fluids. But I can't take time now to do that because everything is so urgent. So to rephrase, it's kind of like taking some time out for yourself, or self-care can kind of sometimes take a backseat because you're just in emergency mode with your loved one. And yet, what happens if we keep driving and driving and driving a car and never fill up the gas tank? Or to use a different analogy, what happens to your cell phone if you never take time to charge it? You don't want your car to stall and stop in the middle of a highway at 4 a.m. while you're desperately driving to where you want to go. And you don't want your cell phone to die in the middle of a critical call. You have to pause to charge it. You have to pull over and go to that gas station every once in a while, even if you don't want to, because you recognize that these machines, they can't keep going without proper maintenance and brakes. Human bodies are the same way too. Caretaking is incredibly difficult, and it's very easy to put ourselves in the backseat for a million different reasons. And we can also add in some critical self-talk again with this, I should, I must, I have to. So self-care and self-compassion, it's not just an extra or bonus thing and nice to have. It's tactical. It helps you be a better helper. And also self-compassion, it's not just self-care. So it's not just doing pleasurable activities, although that is important because those activities can help you fill that gas tank, so to speak. And I think we can all relate to having less patience, less kindness, less ability to problem solve or even think clearly when we're tired, exhausted, maybe we even feel sick or run down, compared to when we feel rested and a little bit better. And of course, it's hard to rest when you are so stressed and worried about a loved one too. So I fully acknowledge that. And yet it is also still worth the effort. Self-compassion is also about being more aware of our responses, emotions, and thoughts, and locating what's meaningful. So what we value in our lives and in our relationships. Because understanding our own reactions, our own needs, our own priorities, they help focus us in the helping process, and it helps to sustain us. And that's essential in a long helping process because often it is a marathon. And it's also about having the same patience, respect, and care for yourself that you would give to others in your life and that you hope to give to your loved one. So all of the different tools we've gone through today, they are part of something called the Invitation to Change approach. This approach has 9 topics that are grouped into different components that all kind of contribute to building a context that can invite and support change. So helping with understanding, helping with action, and helping with awareness. You might have noticed today, you've already had a very brief introduction on how behaviors can make sense. One size doesn't fit all. Ambivalence is normal. We started a little bit on one of the communication tools and a very brief intro on self-compassion. The Invitation to Change approach, excuse me, it is based on 3 interventions that have been evaluated and how to support people in making changes. Each of these have their own manuals and books, and so I will go over those in the resource section. The Invitation to Change is just one way these different techniques are combined, and it's specifically designed for people helping their loved ones with substance use. And what's different about this approach, unlike other models where you have to disconnect from your loved one, it instead emphasizes how you can use your relationship in a different way. Like, how else could I support my loved one in getting their needs met that don't involve substances? To be clear, I'm not representing the Center for Motivation and Change, the people who developed this approach. I'm not paid by them in any way. I just find that they do have very accessible and supportive material that I and many families have found to be particularly helpful. But let's just review materials in general right now. So as I just mentioned, there is the Center for Motivation and Change. There's their website. They have these free 20-minute guides. They have a podcast. This book I really like, but there's also a workbook as well. And there's also a free Invitation to Change short guide. So I have those links there. And Alejandra, I believe, is going to send out these slides so you'll have access to these links. They're also posted on my website, drheatherfulton.com. So you can find these slides and click on these links. So don't worry about writing them down really quickly. Another truly excellent option for families is helpingfamilieshelp.com. It has lots of craft related resources. The blog posts in particular are excellent, but they link to other great resources like a provider directory, other great websites and opportunities like the Allies in Recovery groups and events. For more science on the recovery and addiction process, there's a US-based website affiliated with McLean Hospital and Harvard. They have some great resources. For peer support resources that are specific to British Columbia, there's a really great guide written by parents in Victoria for parents of young persons experiencing substance use problems. Another great resource is from Grief to Action website, including their coping kit here. That's really wonderful. It's not specifically craft, but it is very similar to craft and the Invitation to Change approach. The Parents Forever support group, and again, they don't specifically use Invitation to Change or craft, community reinforcement and family training, but many of the concepts are quite similar. Other support groups include Smart Family and Friends, and they do use craft. And there's also Families for Addiction Recovery, and they have some free parent-to-parent support, phone coaching, and support groups as well. And last but not least, people almost always ask me, what about finding treatment options? And it does depend on your area of the province. So here are two guides that may help you navigate this area. So one is just a national kind of guideline from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. And then there's a BC resource here as well. So now I'd just like to open it up for questions. And while I can't give specific medical or clinical advice on any specific situations, I'm very happy to speak generally or clarify any points in my talk.
Heather, you mentioned craft, C-R-A-F-T. Can you explain again what craft means and how it works?
Sure. So I'm going to go back a couple slides because I should have it and I was really quick. So there it is. So it's community reinforcement and family training. So this was developed by Bob Myers several decades ago as sort of an alternative to, if you've heard of interventions or Al-Anon. And so it was really looking at, well, hey, what if we looked at rewards? What if we taught people different communication skills? What if we kind of tried to just understand what's the function that substance use is playing in a loved one's life? What if we tried that? And so that became craft. And they did some head-to-head comparisons between craft, interventions, and some other things. And they found craft was actually much more effective. People were, one, more likely to complete the treatment, but then also more likely for the loved one to actually enter treatment. And that the support people that were in craft also had increased improvements in their mental health as well. So craft, that's what craft is. There might be more details than they wanted to know, but that is it.
No, that's good. I think that helps people understand a little bit more what that means. We don't have any other questions, so I'll ask you a question. Let's see, what question was I going to ask? Oh, yes, you'd been talking about intervention. Intervention makes for good TV. And then the other big one that I see out there is AA, or the support group for the loved ones of, is called Al-Anon. What is the science on those two, intervention or Al-Anon, or for that matter, AA? Do you know anything about the science on those?
Yes. So some of those were the comparisons for craft versus these different approaches. So there is that research, right, where craft seems to outperform. That being said, I want to acknowledge one of the essential pieces in invitation to change is one size doesn't fit all, right? If someone is finding Al-Anon helpful, that's wonderful, right? Then great. And also, one thing we have to acknowledge, same with AA, because often we can, as addiction treatment professionals, sometimes we can be a bit harsh on AA. AA, you can show up to a meeting almost immediately. You can stay in for as long as possible. It's no cost, right? We do not have as many approaches with psychologists or social workers that are like that you get treatment almost immediately. It's low cost. You can stay in for a long period of time. That's really important to people, right? So if people are finding it helpful, then great. If they're not finding it helpful, then no, okay, there's also different approaches. Smart family and friends or other peer support groups, they take a slightly different approach. So then I think I would encourage someone to try that. If one was really not working for you, didn't jive with your values, okay, try something else. That's what this is really all about, is that there's many different options for people.
One individual is saying that the helper would be more helpful to look into options for their loved ones in addiction. So to look at several options would be a good idea. I'm just wondering if you want to comment on that.
Sure. I think it would depend what exactly they mean. So does it mean options for their addiction of, sometimes it can be really helpful for the helper to think, why does my loved one use this substance? What do they get out of it? Hey, are there any ideas I might have of how they could get those needs met in different ways? Could I offer those ideas and suggestions to them and invite them on something? Like, so sometimes it could be connecting with people or kind of getting some meaning or accomplishment, then inviting to do that with them. But if it means what are some treatment options, that potentially could be helpful. I think that would be a great question to ask your loved one, right? Would it be helpful for me to look into different options that might be available for treatment? Would you be interested in that? What would be important for you in treatment, right? Because sometimes treatment sounds scary, like I'm going to go away for 6 months and lose my job while I'm doing it. But sometimes it can be like, well, let's just look, what are the options available to us? What are the wait lists like even? So I guess it could really depend there what they mean.
Yep. I'll get to Kim in just a moment. So question is, how do we help loved ones with low efficacy and ambivalence? This loved one states that this option doesn't work for them because they did not have success at it. So I'm just wondering if you have something to say about that.
Sure. I have so many thoughts. They're all kind of crowding my brain of which one to talk about first. Okay. So first of all, like, what does success mean? Does that mean abstinence, like no substance use, and no substance use forever, right? Because that's often when I work with sometimes people with substance use, whereas, oh, I failed, but they had many months of meeting their goal. So then when is the pat on the back? Like, when you're dead and have never used, like, that's going to be a long time, right? So sometimes it's like, what does success? And could success be steps closer, right? Would that potentially be okay? Like cutting down, reducing. The other thing I'm also thinking of is, say, the literature of people quitting smoking. The average number of quit attempts, somewhere, I think the most recent one I heard was 9, but I also have heard of 11.
Yeah.
That's a lot of attempts, right? That's a lot of attempts. But often sometimes our society might be that, oh, I'm back at square one, right? If I have, say, I wasn't using, or I didn't quite meet my goal, where you're not at square one, right? You haven't forgotten all that learning and all that experience, right? That's still with you. You might be at a bumpier part of the road, road of recovery, where maybe you gotta slow down a little bit. It's not as fast as you wanted to go on that road. And yet it's not like you don't have all the past and all that experience. They all are learning experiences. It's kind of like any of us, we're driving along the highway, you miss an exit. You don't give up and say, well, whatever, and now I'm driving all the way to Calgary because I missed my exit. You go, oh, okay, I got to reroute. Yes, it's a pain. It's a hassle. I didn't want it to happen. Maybe it's not even okay that it happened, and yet it did. So what can I learn from it? How can I reroute? How do I gather? So sometimes it might be just shifting, what do we define as success? And then also a really good question sometimes to ask people is, when was the time they were successful in something, right? It doesn't have to be about substance use, but something that they were successful in their life, right? What were the key ingredients? Could any of those apply now to this situation, right? So building on someone's strengths and abilities that they already have, could we apply it to this different situation? So that sometimes can be a helpful way to just start that conversation as well.
And that person added in one more idea, and that is, what role does shame play in ambivalence?
A big one would be my short answer. Yeah, it's a big one. And it's hard. There is not one phrase or one thing you can do that's going to take away someone's shame, right? It's there. And yet, are there things that we can do that help, like having open conversations, right? Giving analogies of, like, sometimes comparing it to physical illnesses can sometimes be helpful. We wouldn't blame someone for developing cancer or for diabetes. We don't say they fell off the wagon on their sugars or whatever. And yet we do about substance use. And so kind of just acknowledging of, like, yeah, our society's real harsh about substance use. It is. And yes, the stigma is real. It absolutely is real. And so it's not sometimes even about being deceptive, but sometimes you do have to use partial honesty, right? Of, I'm taking some time off work for a medical condition, right? Rather than maybe going into it in detail. So I think sometimes validating that, of completely understandable why you feel that way. And yet, what's going to be helpful? What can I do? Is there anything I can help and support, right? And just talking about it, because secrecy drives more shame and more guilt. So often opening it up, and even if there's just one person, which is you, to openly discuss this with, often that can really be helpful.
Hi there. Great. Thanks. Well, I guess it's actually a two-part question going back to what I initially asked. I guess as I was listening to the presentation, it's in terms of inviting the conversation, or like gently asking, my sibling, like, how are you, like opening up that conversation, because I find that everybody else that's come at him has shut him down. And I want him, or I guess I want the relationship to feel that it's actually open and a safe space, that it's non-judgmental, that I'm coming from a place of love, having changed my relationship to kind of or plant the seeds for him to say, hey, there can't be some change. And I'm trying to kind of suss out how to get that to happen, because I've asked once, but just said, hey, how you doing? He's like, I'm not talking about anything. And he just walked away. And I was like, okay, just saying how your day's going,
Yeah, you got a real red conversation light there, right? So I think that's great. You got a red conversation light and you backed off, right? We want to look for green lights, and sometimes we don't get them. And often with that, kind of what I'm hearing from you a little bit is this person might, and this is, I'm going to talk in general. Often people, sometimes they're tired of talking about their substance use and they feel real defensive. So even a question like, hey, how's it going? It's like, oh, not this again. I don't want to get into this, right? So sometimes even just being a person where we don't have to talk about this can be really helpful. So sometimes working with people, I know with substance use disorders, we talk about, okay, when you have a craving, what's helpful? Sometimes they want someone where they can talk about, I've got a craving, this is exactly what's going on, and they have someone to talk to about that. Sometimes they're like, I want to talk about anything except for this craving right now. I want to focus on something else. So sometimes it can be really helpful of just, I'm not going to talk to you about your substance use. We're not going to do anything like that. Let's go have fun and do something else, right? That's building the relationship. It's building the support, and that maybe down the line, there might be some more green lights, right? Because they're not feeling like I'm just going to get hammered over the head. If we're going to get hit with a hammer over the head, you're not going to hang out with that person, right? So finding other ways to connect, and that maybe you might find some green lights in the future, it's really solid.
Because then my next part of that question is does that kind of suggest enabling a person? Because I'm curious about that. To me, it appears like it's a slippery slope, because if somebody is showing interest into even just being someone to listen, they may not be honest, and then they're gonna, I'm projecting here, like go to the person that enables whatever the substance usage.
Kim, you opened up a topic on enabling and codependency that we're going to need a whole other hour to unpack.
I saw your eyes.
So here's what I'm going to just put out there, because I'm also mindful of time. There is an amazing article in the New York Times by Maya Slavitz. I don't think I'm pronouncing her last name right, but it's called something about ending the toxic myth of codependency. Excellent article. And it talks a little bit about like, what is enabling really? And what is codependency really? How about I'll just leave it there because of time.
Okay.
But I think enabling is often a problematic term, because often it's just like our efforts to help. And what is going to increase substance use or decrease, it's so individualized. And gosh, there's so much there. We need a whole other hour. Next year, next psychology month, we'll do enabling and codependency. And
You realize what you've just signed up for, right?
So I'm waiting a year. Okay.
I agree. Let's do it maybe before then. But maybe try and find that article by Maya Slavitz on New York Times. That is a good place to start. Okay. Also, Center for Motivation and Change, they have a couple blog posts, I think, on that topic as well. That is another one to potentially look into. Be mindful of time. Let's do some key takeaways that I'm hoping that maybe you got. Maybe you took something else from the talk today. Maybe you didn't. That's okay. Here's what I'm hoping that potentially people are walking away with today. Number one, loving someone and being concerned about their substance use. It's really challenging. It's really hard. And you're not alone. When thinking about your loved one and their behaviors, even though it can be very frustrating and very challenging at times, it is also helpful to think about how they make sense, because behaviors do make sense, even substance use. Ambivalence, it can sometimes be terrifying to hear, and yet it is normal. Emphasizing choice and control is often essential in supporting behavior change, remembering that teeter-totter and how autonomy is the balance point. Simply listening, it's not nothing. It is active and it's important. The ask, offer, ask, or information sandwich is a helpful format when you need to offer information. And self-care and self-compassion, they are tactical. They're not just nice to have bonus activities. And I'm hoping that you got that there are many resources for more information. If this is something at all that is intriguing your interest, there's many of these websites. You can also access the slides on my website, drheatherfulton.com. And yeah, thank you so much.
So want to invite you guys all, if you enjoyed this, Heather has just invited herself, and I will be inviting her next year to do another talk for us. So we run these talks we run these talks every year during February. We have had a bunch of them so far, and we've got a couple more coming up. So we've got one on child anxiety, and we've got one on mindfulness meditation. You can either find them through our website, psychologist.bc.ca, which you'll see in a moment, or you can go to Eventbrite, which you see at the bottom of this page here. Alrighty, so then the next slide is, there we go. So Psychological Association, basically there's a couple of things that are happening with us. One of the things is if you know somebody or if you yourself are struggling with things, is we do have a referral list. And so you can go on to our website at psychologist.bc.ca. There's that thing. It will say find a psychologist, or you will also be able to hit on the February Psychology Month. Or if you prefer, you can phone us at 604-730-0522, and that will help you find somebody to perhaps help you out. And then the last one is where I stand on my little soapbox. And I say that, we are also trying to do all kinds of things like working on things like getting some MSP coverage for psychologists, or getting more coverage through extended health benefits and those kinds of things. So we're out there lobbying governments and corporations and unions and HR departments and all that kind of stuff for more mental health dollars. If you feel like wanting to help us out, then please contact your union, government, whatever it is, okay? So lots of people would like to see the cost of psychological help going down, and unfortunately, the cost and the availability is a bit of a barrier, and you can see the research there. I'm going to say thank you very much to Dr. Heather Fulton. I saw her do this similar presentation to this several years ago, and I went like, wow. And so now that we're doing it virtually, I wanted to reach out to a larger crowd. So again, I want to thank Dr. Heather Fulton immensely. It was a beautiful little presentation, and obviously there was a lot of interest. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the questions. So thank you once again. And hopefully we're going to see you back next year. I just wanted to ask Heather one last question while people are linking to the survey here, and that is that I noticed that you talk a lot about substance use, but you don't talk about addiction, and I personally really like that. But do you want to explain a little bit why you talk about substance use rather than addiction?
Yes, and I think it's mainly because substance use, it's a spectrum, right? And so where we draw the line on when it becomes substance use versus substance use disorder and addiction, it's arbitrary, right? And just because you're on this side of the line doesn't mean that you might not be having concerns about your use. And sometimes there can sometimes be mental health conditions that can they can present similar symptoms, right? And so ultimately it's arbitrary, and it really comes down to, what do you think about substance use? How's it affecting you and your life? What do you want to do it? And so that's why I go with substance use. So it's a full spectrum. And so let's just embrace the full spectrum and not put too many labels, because labels come with a lot of baggage and judgment. And what I think that term means may not be what you mean. So let's just go with use. It's kind of keeps it a bit more clear and less judgmental. And there's a lot of judgment when it comes to substance use disorders and substance use in general.
Perfect. Thank you very kindly. And as I say, we're going to be contacting you some other time about coming back again next year. So thank you very much. Lots of love coming from the audience members here who are loving your presentation, and hopefully we're going to get even more people for your next presentation next year.
And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.